הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. My guest today, Noah Aronson, is a recording artist, composer, performer, and song leader. He creates music and interactive experiences at the intersection of wellness, spirituality, and creativity. Noah travels around the world leading Jewish musical experiences in synagogues, Jewish community centers, and at concerts. If you're in a progressive Jewish community, you have either hosted Noah or are probably using his melodies in your prayer services. His songs like Am I Awake, Let There Be Love, and two of my favorites, Eilacham Da Libi and Goofy Goof, are beloved in synagogues, schools, and Jewish summer camps. I will say that the music videos for Goofy Goof and Eilacham Da Libi were core on our playlist on YouTube during the pandemic. Yeah. We watched them over and over again. My kids are obsessed. His albums include Close to the Fire, Am I Awake, Left Side of the Page, and our family's favorite, Move, which has a rainbow cover. We call it the Rainbow Album. The Beatles have the white album. Noah has the rainbow album, Move, which is an amazing album that I highly recommend. They all are. In celebration of the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Av, Noah is going to be leading us in a special musical experience event called Let There Be Love. We are super, super excited about this, Noah. We can't wait. It's going to air on Sunday, August 18th, which is Tu B'Av, at 8 p.m. Eastern, and then again at 8 p.m. Pacific. Noah and I go way back. I think of everyone I've had on this show so far, you're the person I've known the longest. We started in kindergarten at Salman Schechter Day School in West Orange, New Jersey, which is now called Golda Ak Academy. And there's been a long journey. A lot of things have happened along the way, but I'll share two that stand out to me. One is that we were co-captains of the volleyball team together.
That is the most important.
Schechter volleyball. Mrs. Udell, we give you our respect. You taught us volleyball, taught us how to be leaders at an early age. And the second, which I think we're going to talk about a lot of things, but I think if there's one big takeaway I've already had in my life that shaped me by you, which is that at a certain point in history, after I had my first daughter, I'm a student of Rabbi Avi Weiss, who really preaches to us the idea of bringing our children into the world with song and creating song around them all the time. And as you may remember, or may not, I think you'll remember, I was very not confident about my singing. And I felt like it pained me that I didn't sing to my daughter, Olivia, but when she woke up in the morning around the table, I just didn't have the confidence to do that. And we had a chavruta where I brought a text to share with Noah, who was growing in his learning of Torah, and Noah gave me some singing lessons. And I certainly am not ready to perform a concert for JBS like Noah, nor will I ever be, but I have the confidence now where I sing so much that I've gotten to the point where my kids are asking me to not sing. So I feel like really, if just that alone, Dayenu, Noah, thank you for that, because it's really changed my life and changed our family dynamic, so thank you.
I didn't know that last part, that you're singing too much, but that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
And it actually also pains me to hear, I hear that a lot. A lot of people say that they feel stuck with singing, and I actually think that one of the things that is really great with Jewish community is we come together on often a weekly basis, and we join together as a congregation, we join our voices together. So the goal is not to have any one voice stick out more than the others, is actually to blend our voices together, and then that experience of singing is such a spiritual practice in and of itself, that it's hard to be the only one singing, and not everyone is going to be the next Adele, right? But I do think we all can sing, and we all have the ability to turn our breath into song in that way, and that to me is such a beautiful expression of spirituality. So the fact that you have that relationship with your daughter and you're using the song in that way is that's magical to me.
Thank you. It's funny, so you bring up a few things for me already. The first is I struggle with that in synagogue spaces. I feel like often people like someone who's a performer that sings and you watch, and I've noticed that I find myself more drawn in where it's someone who's kind of bringing people to sing with you. And actually, there's a place that I've gone many times, and everyone loves the chazan, the cantor, the bal tefillah, the person leading the services, and it doesn't hit for me. I couldn't figure it out, and then I realized that you're going to correct me here, but I guess he was singing in a key that I couldn't match. So it was just not physically possible. Someone told me you could sing an octave lower. Am I saying sentences that make sense right now?
Yeah.
He said if you sing an octave lower, then you can sing along. But I was like, it hit me in the face. I was like, oh, it's because I can't do what he's doing. That's why I can't join along. So it's a real, it's a challenge to find your way in sometimes.
The point of a Baal Tefillah, of someone whose job it is to kind of be the servant of prayer, basically, to kind of help people through that. It's obviously that person was given a God-given gift to be a good performer and presenter and a dynamic leader, and that's why they're in that role. But it's not a performer. It's very distinctly not a performer, right? It's someone who has the awareness of the whole room and then can somehow channel everybody's voices through their experience. And the role is to elevate everyone's experience. And if you're choosing things in too high of a key or that don't work for everybody, you're not actually doing the job properly. That means you're more interested in your voice standing out above and beyond everyone else's, as opposed to the whole job is to bring everybody along this journey with you. So there's it's a sacred balance there with that. And for me, I draw a distinction, like when I'm leading tefillah, when I'm leading prayer experiences, my job is different, my role is different. And then when I'm doing a concert, for instance, I have a different hat on, so to speak. And it's important to be able to have those different roles.
Beautiful. So let's stay on that for a little bit longer. Talk to me about, you taught me how to sing in front of my kids. I still don't have the confidence to lead prayer in my synagogue. And people are always like, "You're a rabbi, come. And I'm like, no, I have a terrible voice. You don't want me up there. Talk to me about, aside, you mentioned the technical aspect, which I think is important, choosing which, melodies you're going to use, what key, those kind of things. Talk to me also about, I don't want to say the spiritual preparation, but let's call it that. Like if you are preparing to stand in front of a congregation and lead them in prayer, like what does that process look like for you in terms of preparing and also executing?
We could talk about that for hours, right? Because in some ways, so I just turned 40 this year. In some ways,
I know, same grade. I checked it.
Exactly, we both know. So in some ways, I'm preparing for the week leading up to Shabbat, but in some ways I've been preparing for 40 years. You bring all of the Torah you've learned for your whole life, and that gets infused through you. I think my dad actually talks about that one of his influences was Johnny Carson, so he would watch Johnny Carson, and apparently what Johnny Carson's preparation is he would prepare, and then when they would air and go live, he would have absolutely no notes in front of him so he could be fully present with the person in front of him. And so then he never knew exactly what would happen, but he did all the preparation necessary so that he could be then fully present. And I think that is so much about what it means to be a leader. It's like you study, you learn, you practice, you live all of those things, and then when you get in front of a community or with people, you're just fully present, and whatever, you're just a vessel, and you whatever you can be to be a conduit of that the community, and also your connection with your ability to connect with the divine, that's just dropping in to be as fully present as possible. And that takes a lifetime, right? That's
right.
The spiritual practice, is how can I remove the veil? How can I open myself up more and more and more in the different spiritual practices to let more light in, let more light out, and all of that. That's a lifetime of practice right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then I have so many questions, but first let's ask, as someone who's doing this across the world, basically, if you're the Baal Tefillah of a community, you're the prayer leader, you spend time with these people, this one's going through a tough time, this one's going through that. You have a sense of what you're bringing with you when you stand before the divine and lead the people in prayer. How do you come into a community, spend however much time you spend with them? I mean, you're probably returning to communities. Also, there's some overlap, but how do you lead a group where you're like a dropped-in leader?
That's a great question, and you mentioned that about this person is experiencing a loss and this person is going through a health journey. That actually very much distinctly feels like the role of a clergy person, and I'm not. I chose not to be a clergy person. I studied. I went to rabbinical school for a couple of years. You and I actually overlapped for a couple of years, and then I made a conscious decision in the middle of that journey to say, actually, becoming a servant of a community is actually not that's not how I want my life's path to be. I found myself more in the role of artist, and so that artistic journey has kind of been more of an exploration and exploratory, but I don't know what's going on in everybody's lives in the congregation. If I was a consistent leader in one community, then that would be my job, to be very aware of what's happening in this person's life and this person's life. And then you're really holding all of that for them. It's such a sacred role. And I kind of realized middle of the way through rabbinical school that wasn't necessarily going to be my journey to serve one congregation in that way. But I do feel like if I can be the most open vessel in that moment, then people can kind of use me in a way to help guide their own prayers in that experience. I don't know how to explain it more differently than that, but the more open I can be, that becomes a model for other people to be able to express their selves. Because I don't know exactly what's happening individually, but I'm trying to be as fully present, and
What I hear you saying, and again, you're the artist and I'm the rationalist here, but I hear you saying, sorry to put everything in categories, is that there's, one way to approach standing before the congregation could be like, what are the specific things I'm praying for this congregation? Like, this person needs peace in their house, this person needs a swift healing, that kind of stuff. And I think I hear you saying that, like, modeling how to pray is kind of like you're bringing people in that way and you're allowing them to follow that model and be able to pray themselves in some way.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's like, if the more present I can be a model for the way that other people, they might not even know that was possible. And you actually said something before about like how even you, as such a trained rabbi who have such a long experience with this, even you feel uncomfortable or shy getting up and lead. There's the one aspect we were talking about, like just as a vocalist, but also there's so much in terms of like fear and hesitancy with Judaism in general, with like I don't know this, I don't know what to do here, I don't know what is it a chag or is it a holiday today, and I'm gonna miss the proper insertion in the Amidah, and so there's so many things that make us hesitant, and so like actually to communicate, like in this moment I'm just comfortable, calm, letting go and open, and like it doesn't matter what I know or don't know in this moment. It certainly doesn't matter to God, right? It's like we have put a lot of those burdens on our shoulders as like a Jewish community, because like we're not great with letting go, right? We're good at piling on and adding more and more and more, and that's great for the holding on part, but I think we could all learn a lot about like the letting go piece and just being actually able to be present, and it's a whole side of the practice and the tradition that feels like there's a lot to be explored there.
Right. So I think if I remember from many years ago reading Aryeh Kaplan's book on meditation, he talks a little bit around how there was like this moment in rabbinic history where it was like, should prayer be like do what you want, like choose your own adventure, or should prayer be like a specific rote thing that you follow? And I think the latter being in some ways like a representation of what the temple service looked like. It was very like carefully take this step and then that step and this happens in this order. And I think at least I think if I remember the way he portrays it, is the idea that we chose the latter, which is a little bit more rigid, because it's more likely to be sustainable. Because over time, if everyone does whatever they want, there will be no direction here. So I think that there is that element. Of course, sometimes maybe we go too far, right? We're always in the place where people are like correcting people because they said the word wrong and that kind of thing. Which I don't want to diss. I don't want to diss that for lack of a better term. But I think that. You're bringing another side of this, which is like, okay, like in addition to getting it right technically, which again could be musically or it could be the text, there's a whole element of like, what does it mean to show up in prayer, and can you model that? So I'll ask you one step further, which is, practically speaking, are there practices you do that help you to get there? Like how do you get there?
Yeah, so I have come to a place in my Jewish practice where I'm comfortable inviting in outside practices that are not from Judaism. There was a long time when I felt like a guilt or a shame, or I'm not Jewish enough, or I'm not this enough. And then somewhere along the way recently I've come to an acceptance of like, I am Jewish, and I don't have to necessarily do anything. I am. It's in my DNA. It's who I am. So I am perfectly comfortable like bringing in like a qigong tai chi practice, or a yoga practice, or something that moves my body, or a meditation practice that may not have come from a Jewish source, but I'm a Jewish vessel. So anything that I learn from an outside source, I then infuse it through my own experience, and then that becomes a Jewish expression just because I am a Jewish person in my body.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of movement and breathing practices that have helped me along the way that I wasn't finding within Judaism. And again, it took me a long time to be comfortable exploring that. But now that I've kind of come to an acceptance of my own Jewish practice and my Jewishness, then I'm more than happy to bring in the things from outside the tradition that feel like they're serving me. And so yeah, movement, breath work is super powerful for me. Journaling is very powerful. But anything that gets me into my own experience. And another reason why the rabbinical school practice wasn't working for me was because it was a lot of ingesting from outside in. And it was like sitting in front of a Talmud all day long and taking in from the outside in, which is a beautiful and necessary part of the tradition. But I needed to like clear the space a little bit to let myself to be able to hear what's going on within and bring that out. And so I needed to kind of take some space from that a little bit. So that's and I think it's also the artistic journey as well. Is like clear some space, take in what you can take in, then clear space, and then express.
Make something.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, and then you mentioned a little bit, you referenced your father before, and kind of, the Johnny Cash approach, the idea of like
Johnny Carson. Yeah.
Oh, that makes more sense. I was thinking of Johnny Cash, the musician. That's very interesting. That is Johnny Carson.
Johnny Carson.
That's a different. That places that metaphor differently for me. Okay, thank you. So when you think about kind of what you've taken in and where it's brought you to today. Share a little bit. Let's start with your father and your mother. I know both have had an influence on you. Share a little bit about your father.
My parents have had an influence on me. Wow, what a concept.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, as they say.
You really asked the hard-hitting questions.
Yes.
That's right. Yes,
well, it's interesting.
Course.
I mean, your father's a cantor. I'm a rabbi. I have kids growing up in a rabbi house. You got a cantor as a father.
No,
I think
of course.
There's a story there, is my guess.
Of course, how could my parents not have had an influence on who I am and shaped my expression? But yes, when I grew up, my father was a cantor in a congregation in New Jersey, in South Orange, and he was beloved by his congregation. He was 47 years in one congregation. That's like almost unheard of, basically, to like stay in one community. He was the youngest cantor in America, actually, for a while, because at the time, a lot of people were doing like the professional cantor route was like a second job for people. And he also was able to go right after high school. He went directly into cantorial school. Wow. So he was like 21 or 22 when he started at his pulpit. And
he was in South Orange from the beginning?
He started in Orange or East Orange, and then they merged and then went to South Orange. But yeah, with the same community.
His whole career.
His whole career.
Wow.
One congregation.
I don't know if that's a credit to him or a credit to the community. They both get credit for that.
It's both. I mean, that's
unbelievable.
And it's an evolving, actually similar to what we were talking about before. It's like the tradition is what it is, and then we evolve alongside it, right? We read Torah every day or every week, whatever it is. It stays the same, and we grow and evolve with it, right? It's like this keva kavanah thing. So he was in one congregation.
So just explain keva kavanah.
So when I was talking before about like holding on and letting go, I think about we have this concept of keva kavanah. So keva is the fixed tradition that like has been passed down from generation to generation. It's our link to the past, and that's our history. And then the kavanah is the intentionality that we bring to every single moment and every single day, and we need both of those things. We have Judaism is the balance between those. You can't give up the history, and you also have to be able to live in it right now. And so we're always trying to find that balance. Sometimes some communities are too far balanced out in the kavanah, in the keva or kavanah. Like, we got to find the middle ground, and each of us is going to have a different point of reference for that. But with regards to my father, he was in one congregation, but he grew and evolved and changed, and his interests shift over time. So he would never think of it as one career. He would think of it as many different careers. At one point, he was the principal of the religious school, and then he stopped doing that for a while, and then he actually went back to school for therapy, and so he became a psychotherapist because he realized that being a pastor necessitated a bit of understanding about psychology, and I mean, he then went through a phase where he was really enjoying putting on like musicals, so he hired a composer to write 3 different musicals for the congregation. So I was surrounded by like a father figure who was so like creative and so invested in like bringing the arts and bringing creativity to a Jewish community life. And yeah, he was doing it within the life of this one community. But it was a very rich life for him. And he wouldn't say that it was like, he doesn't see it as one long career. He sees it as multiple different careers. Yeah.
Wow. And then what was that like as a child in that home? Like what were you seeing or like what were the aha moments for you when you look back?
Yeah, I mean, he was very much in his element. I mean, he was clearly doing what he was meant to be doing. And it also, and not only did it come from love of Jewish community, but love of Israel came like hand in hand. It was very, like we would go to Israel all the time as kids, and so we had a very strong connection with love of Israel, and that was like the most important thing for my father. And so just, you know, we would go to shul and watch him sing and watch him bring people to tears and move people. So that was my entry point into Jewish communal life. Even though I wasn't planning on going into Jewish music professionally as my career, like when I finally made that decision, it was such a natural and seamless thing because I grew up just watching someone who was so embodied in that.
Wow. All right. Amazing. And it's very powerful to think about that. And do you remember, like, did you like connect to prayer when he was leading it? Was it like,
I don't
do
think
you not know any different because you grew up in it?
It was, part of it was just going and watching my dad, you know, and
my dad's doing his thing, I'm gonna go check it out.
Yeah, and there was a performative element. I think in most progressive communities, I would say for the last 150 years, there's been, like, since like the German Reform, like they switched the model, right? So in Germany in 1850s, when reform was just getting started, they started building their communities where the seats were facing forward and the clergy were facing the congregation. That move, I think, was one of the most influential shifts in like contemporary Jewish prayer, like, because, and still in most traditional communities, the leader is still facing the ark, right? And then so that's the traditional concept of like the prayers of the community are going through that prayer leader, right? And but once you turn that around, then it becomes a much more performative model. It's hard for it not to be,
right?
Because every other environment where you're either it's a lecture or a play or an opera or theater, whatever it is, we're so used to that being the model, it's performative. So once we shifted from the prayer leader facing back or facing towards, so it's hard for it not to be performative. So it felt growing up like, oh, I'm watching my dad perform, like he's doing his thing, and that was performative in a way. So was it prayerful? I don't think I understood what that meant until later in life. Yeah.
Beautiful. And it's just a couple words on your mom, because I know you have an interesting story there as well.
Yeah, my mother was born in Haiti, and
not something I heard from every kid in our class
right.
at Solomon
Schechter Day School,
elementary school.
Yeah, well, and we would go back to Haiti often. Actually, I would get taken out. I don't know if you remember it, when I was in elementary school, I would get taken out of school for like a month or so at a time because I would go to Haiti.
Yeah, sure.
And that was a big part of my upbringing. And I think people who grow up in islands, like they feel a very strong connection, and it was very hard for her to be away for long periods of time from her family there. And so going back there was a very big part of my childhood as well. And you couldn't be more distinctly different. Like it's like your Solomon Schechter, Ashkenazi, New Jersey experience, and then like going to Haiti, which is like so vastly different. But her family emigrated in the teens, like around World War I, from the Middle East, from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon. And they were trying to get to the States, but it was like at the time Haiti was one of the countries where they were accepting passports from people from those specific countries, and so it was supposed to be a temporary stop, but then life things happened, and then eventually, so my great grandparents stayed, and then they had my grandmother and my grandfather they also were born in Haiti, and met each other. And then my mother and her brother were born in Haiti. And then my mother moved here when she was for college. And then she met my father, this Ashkenazi guy. So it was an intermarriage. It was very challenging. It was like my mom was a Sephardic, from a Sephardic lineage, and my dad was an Ashkenazi lineage. And at the time, that was like not okay. It was a heretical thing to do. But.
Wow. Do you have, I guess, memories of, or maybe new memories, I don't know how often you're still going back to Haiti, but do you have a sense of the Jewish community there and certainly the Jewish prayer experience there?
Yeah, people ask that question a lot because there are countries that do have a very strong, that did have a strong Jewish connection. Haiti never became a place with strong Jewish identity because most of the Jews didn't stay long enough. So most of the Jewish community left within one generation, and then emigrated to different countries. Some people from my family went to Colombia, to Mexico, and then a lot to the United States. So people went around and didn't necessarily decide to stay in Haiti. So the people who did stay, I would say it was likely because their commitment to living in Jewish community, and in terms of traditional Jewish community, was not as important to them, I guess. Or maybe it was. I think one of the issues was that my grandmother's brother, my great uncle, had polio. And so he wasn't able to move so easily to a different country. And so my grandmother became responsible for him. And so they had to stay. And they had their lives there. I don't think it was their intention, but they did. They stayed. And I think it also begs the question is like, how many generations does it take to plant your roots in a place? And this idea that I'm American, right? Or she's Haitian, or this person is Israeli or not Israeli. How many generations does it take to plant roots? I think it's a really fascinating question. Yeah. That's
really interesting. And then, you mentioned, so we have these roots, for lack of a better term, your mother and your father, and you mentioned that growing up, it wasn't like, I'm going to make Jewish music when I grow up. I don't know if you describe yourself as making Jewish music now. Anyway.
I do, yeah.
But how does that evolve, right? You go, I remember coming to your senior thesis performance at Berklee School of Music, if I'm saying it correctly.
Yes.
I think I was in Boston. I was in Harvard still, and you were finishing there, I guess.
That's right. Yeah.
At that time, were you like, "This is the direction I want to go in," or how do we get from?
I had no
musical
idea
genius to progressive Shlomo, progressive Jewish performer.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was gonna lead to this, but I do know that the Jewish community has held me and has kept kind of the a structure for me that's been really important. I have, as a lot of artists do, I have ADHD, and so I find that my creative interests kind of flow like this, and so having kind of the box to work within has been really helpful for me to be able to look back and say, okay, I've been doing this for 18 years now, even though my interests have shifted and my musical styles have shifted, the fact that the Jewish community has held me in that way has been really amazing. In Schechter we would sing a lot, and so I was in the choir and in the plays, and so music was clearly a big part of my upbringing back then. And then when I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, I was planning. I studied jazz composition and piano, and I was intending to go into more like film music, and I wanted to write theater music as well. But I was working at a congregation in Boston. I was working with the kids. I was like singing songs on the carpet with the kids, and I wasn't intending. It was just a part-time job. I wasn't intending for it to be my work. But then the cantor at the time, her name was Jody Suffren. She actually was a student of my dad's because my dad would teach at the cantorial school. So she knew my father, and so when I came in, she kind of took me under her wing, and she started encouraging me to write some songs. So one of the first melodies I wrote was this little ditty. I didn't even know what I was doing at the time, but that song has become like one of my most popular songs.
Which song?
So they asked me to teach. They wanted me to teach the third graders about the Baruch Hu, about the entrance into prayer. Right, our Baruch Hu is like the call to prayer. It's like there's often some melodies before the Baruch Hu, but Baruch Hu is kind of like that transition point where we start the service in whatever time of day it is. And so I I remember I was reading some book about prayer, and it said something about like Baruch Hu is our asking ourselves if we're awake, right? If we're really truly awake. So then I came in the next week and I had written a couple words down, and I just like started singing to these kids like, am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? And then it kind of take the same melody and we just sing ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. And that was just it. It was just like I was just doing it to help teach about the prayer, and then somehow someone heard that and they're like, oh, that's kind of pretty, and then it started catching on. And my intention was really just to do a little song to teach this group of third graders about prayer. And then over the course of time, other congregations started singing that melody, and then the adults started getting really involved in it, and then the communities around the country were singing this melody that I just thought was just a small little children's song.
Wow.
And now it's become a very prominent piece that a lot of progressive communities, that's how they enter into prayers, from that melody. And so when I kind of saw how that was catching on, and I was like, oh, there's something here. I want to keep kind of working with this and writing more like that, because hearing a congregation sing that melody was just was really powerful for me. I had no idea at the time at Berkeley that I was going to be doing that, but I was so moved by just like hearing people singing these melodies, and I just so it's been quite interesting watching that journey.
Wow, that's an amazing. That's crazy. And yeah, what is that? By the way, I just have to ask. I'm curious. What's it like? It's one thing, you hear about musicians, they're at a concert, you're like in a stadium and everyone is singing along. It's a different thing to go into a synagogue and people are like using something you composed. And by the way, I know you composed both music to existing Jewish prayer like language and also, your own original language as well. Like, what's that like when people are communicating with the divine through things that you've created?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It must feel similar to like when Paul Simon or James Taylor gets up there and sings the song and everybody's singing along with them. I mean, like that is to me the height of musicianship. To be able to have that, to give people that experience is amazing. And then we get to do that in some smaller ways in congregational life it's beautiful. It's oftentimes I don't think of them as mine anymore. I mean, obviously I wrote them and in wherever I was, but like once they're out there, they're no longer mine anymore. And I often find myself in a position of having to teach my songs to a community for the first time, but for the ones that they've already been singing, it's beautiful. It's just out of my hands at that point.
Wow.
It's very sweet.
That's very cool. I want to ask a lot of things here, but we'll start with one. If you go to your website, it says in big letters, "Making music to move you," and it evoked two things for me. And you can go wherever you want. I want to hear about everything. The first is like I mentioned our shared interest in volleyball. You referenced your participation in choir, but also I remember you as like the best dancer in our grade growing up, which was I was a far second, but at least I was second.
We danced together. Yeah, okay. All the bar mitzvahs we danced.
We did okay. And then I know also an area of interest to you is something called Five Rhythms, which I'm sure most of our audience have never heard of. We'll start big and go wherever you want. Talk to me about the movement side of your work. Talk to me about Five Rhythms. Talk to me about dance. Yeah. What do you got? Tell me everything.
Sometimes people ask me what I do for a living, and I say I'm a mover. Yeah. And then people think I move people into different houses and stuff like that. But I just feel like that word works for me a lot. Because I think music is meant to stir something within us, right? To move us towards something, to like take us where we're at and then move us to a different place. So that might be just moving my body and getting me to dance, right? Or moving me so much that tears come out. Like I'm moved emotionally or spiritually. So that is, it feels like that's my job, is to well, first be moved and then to help move others. But I do think like just as powerful as creating music and singing music has been for me, like movement is also such an important piece. And I do think it's like the next frontier of Jewish communal life. It's scary for a lot of people. I mean, like you were saying, like singing is scary and dancing has become scary too. And I think that it's just, I would say like, everyone can sing, not everyone's gonna be Adele, right? Everyone can dance, but not everyone's gonna be, the next Baryshnikov. But I think like we all can move our bodies in intentional ways, and I think that to me is just as much of a spiritual practice. And it feels like we've kind of become comfortable just kind of sitting or standing. I think that's kind of the two things that happen. And like shuckling is definitely part of the experience, right? Like that's something. That's a movement that happens. Yeah. And I honestly, when I'm in a traditional space, I can't stop myself from moving in that way. It's like that's just it's a natural in my DNA. It wants to move when I hear traditional davening, a traditional prayer experience, and so. But there's so much more. It's so much. It could be so much bigger and so much more expressive, and so much more can move through us. And so yeah, you mentioned 5 rhythms. I dance in this dance practice. Was created by someone named Gabrielle Roth in the 70s, and it might be too long for this interview, but basically, there's no prescriptive way of dancing. It is basically a pathway to allow emotions to move through our body in meaningful ways. That starts from just kind of finding ourselves where we're at, called flowing, and then we move through, and it ends in something called stillness. So we go through a whole emotional arc, and it's there's 5 different rhythms there, but it's very powerful just in terms of like the spiritual practice. Whenever I go to class, it's almost like a portal for me. It's like who I am before I enter class, and then 2 hours later, I've been dancing for 2 hours, I'm sweating everything, and then that becomes like I go through a journey, and then by the end, I'm just in a different space. So there's a lot that we as the Jewish community, I think, can grow into, and so movement is the next frontier, I believe. And so a lot of the music that I'm creating now is intended to get us to move, and so our bodies actually more. And I do oftentimes. When I do residencies in congregations, I do movement workshops to kind of help get us out of our head. Like, it's not dancing, it's moving. Even if someone is wheelchair bound, there's something that we can do to be intentional with our movement. There's so much more possibility for us, and that can open up a whole world of expression.
Wow. So first of all, when you think about, I love the metaphor of the Adele, like thinking about because I think it makes sense. People can't access prayer because they don't know the words, or they can't access prayer because they can't sing along. And then movement is like a whole new frontier.
Yeah.
I remember actually many years ago when I was thinking about how to, I'm a fan of I don't know how you call it, but I'm interested in Musar, which we studied together a little bit, Jewish character development. And a big piece of the Musar movement is the idea that we need to develop practices to become the person that we want to be. So their examples would be like, anything from repeating a verse over and over again until you get into like a hysteria about it, to like make it part of who you are, to like walking into a grocery store and asking for a pound of nails. I don't know, like something that'll make you feel embarrassed, make you humble, that kind of thing. But different practices that'll make it happen. And I remember thinking that movement would be a space, and I was like, I had this like idea which I did not try to execute on, which is like, what would it be like to have like a space where you went to like move to Jewish music, almost as like, somewhere between Zumba and 5 rhythms, like some element of like, could you move in a meaningful way, connect religiously, and get exercise? Because as a modern Orthodox Jew, we always lament that it's very difficult in the morning to make it to the minyan, to prayer, and also get our exercise in. And there's an assumption that you should be doing both every morning, or some combination.
Exactly. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Well, I like this.
I'm creating the music for it, and there's other people who I'm hoping to kind of get involved. But it's already happening in small pockets. But like Jewish movement experiences is going to happen. It
really resonates. I think it's a cool idea.
Yeah.
And exactly what you described is what people want. You want it to be a portal. You want your religious experience, your prayer experience, your spiritual experience to be, you walk in, you experience something, and you come out the other way.
But in order for it to happen, we've got to be okay with letting go of some things. Like, you can't have it all, right? I mean, or we can just trust that some spaces are going to be for keeping the container, and other spaces are for experimentation and exploration. It's not like if we do this thing, we have to lose all of these things. But like, I do think that there's a lot that can be learned in terms of movement and breath and yeah.
So I'm just interested. So we'll go deeper here. I think one of my hesitations around this work is the public nature of it. But I think I remember being like, if everyone got like a phone booth and couldn't see each other, and the same music was playing, we were all like, dancing in our square without anyone seeing you, I would feel much more comfortable, because it's vulnerable, it's sensual, it's experiential. All these things are happening. Suddenly, like, in Orthodox circles, there's the mechitza, for example. But in all circles, like, how do you have an experience that can take you that far? In front of, I met a friend of yours recently who told me they did 5 rhythms with you, and that there was like 10 years before you spoke a word to each other. It's in silence. But you had like deep, intense experiences during the same room. So
beautiful.
Is it by design that we should be having more intimate, intense experiences with like our community, or is the thinking that like this is about you and like, it happens to be you're doing it in a room because that's convenient for all of us to be in one place, because I can't create private for each of you?
Yeah, I can't speak for all of Judaism, because I also
of course.
Because also like there's a lot in terms of the rules and the rigidity in certain parts of the Jewish world that might very well never be able to get to that level of comfort in that way. And I think that that's fine. I'm not trying to push people out too far out of their comfort zone. And
I'll pause you there. I will say that even I would argue that this does happen sometimes in the parts of the world. It's just not. It's not in a prayer space, and it's not a co-ed space. If you go to like a wedding, and there's like ecstatic dance around the groom, or on the other side around the bride, there are those moments of like somewhat coordinated, somewhat free, but there's like, I actually find myself now, as you know, we both grew up like into music. I was dancing to Michael Jackson and Prince and Whitney Houston, all those kinds of things. And now I find myself more, like it's harder for me to like dance hard to a Madonna song, let's say, but if I'm at a friend's wedding or my friend's son's bar mitzvah, and we're celebrating like this big moment, like the juice flows much more naturally to me, and I feel like I can be more ecstatic and like really get into the tornado with everyone and like make it happen. So
I think
it's there, by the way.
You mentioned a lot of things. I think so. A lot of the issues with even with the music and singing part becomes in terms of the prayer piece of it. If we take it out of prayer and we just say this is a class, not a prayer experience, then it can be prayerful. Right. But you're not infringing on people's practice of prayer. So I would not say, for someone who's kind of living in a more traditional way, I would not say this is going to replace your daily davening. This might be a addition to. This might be after you have your morning davening, you'll do an hour class, or before or after, whatever it is. So I don't want to replace anything. And also the same thing with like not on Shabbos. It's like Shabbos is a certain thing.
No, and to be clear, no, I'm not asking these questions from a place of like, how do we make this work in the Orthodox world at all? I think it's more I'm trying to reflect on the ways this shows up in different spaces. And like,
but we definitely do move as a people.
Right, I'm saying like there is that movement. Like I don't think we should be like, well, in the Orthodox world,
totally,
they sit still.
No, they don't.
Right, they don't.
And I mean, especially like, I think
you mentioned the shuttling and like Chassidim, all those. All right, so but keep going. But all right, so let's go back to the question though, which is like, is it by design to be vulnerable and intimate in community? Like I was at a Jewish professional conference once, and someone led a 5 rhythms dance thing, and I was so torn because I was like, this is so cool. I really enjoy this movement that's happening around. But I also was like, I'm in a professional setting, and this feels very vulnerable, and I don't know what the equivalent is, but like I wouldn't, whatever you want to call it. There are certain activities I wouldn't do in a professional setting that I feel myself doing here, and that feels weird.
Absolutely. I don't know how to speak to that in terms of someone's comfort zone.
How do you think about it for yourself? Start with that.
Yeah, because I do.
What does it feel like when you do 5 rhythms?
Yeah, you're right. It is confronting a lot of those things, and then but that discomfort might be something to lean into and learn. Like, why is that uncomfortable? am I uncomfortable with what I'm going to do in that space? Am I uncomfortable with what someone else will do to me? Am I uncomfortable with how I'm being seen? Is that because of my role in the community? Is that a role? So what is the discomfort there? Is important. If we were in a therapy session, we would lean into that discomfort and say, what's coming up for you around that? What's the fear around that? I'm not saying now go do the thing. It's just explore that curiosity. Like, what is that fear? Because most of us have that fear, and so. But there's a learning there. There's something to glean from that. But it doesn't have to be intimate. It doesn't have to be vulnerable. But it sometimes can be and is for people, depending on where their comfort level is and where their pain points are and how much of themselves they're willing to share. Some people get on the dance floor and they're so open and expressive and willing to do anything, and then some people stay very kind of to themselves. You asked if it's by design. There's no specific design to it. If you want, you can go keep your eyes closed and be completely to yourself the whole time, or you can be dancing with people and having a fun experience. So there's no rules in that way. And I think that is true of prayer too. It's like we could create a little bit of a box, but then everybody can kind of create their own journey through it too. In some ways, prayer could be really vulnerable and exposed. If we're doing prayer in our most honest way, and we're really true, we're not just doing it to get through the words, but we're actually trying to get these prayers through us. Like that could be very vulnerable too. It's just I think what you said earlier. It's like we lean on the fixed, we lean on the the routine of it. And that in some ways that makes it more comfortable for us to not have to be vulnerable. But the vulnerability piece, that's where a lot of really interesting spiritual experiences and awakenings can happen in our lives too.
That's beautiful. I'll add to that, and then I'll move us forward. We've touched on prayer, and we've touched on music, and now we've touched on movement. We've talked about most of them, let's call them public settings, whether it's a synagogue, it's a 5 Rhythms class, it's the Jewish Community Center. But I just want to add, certainly, coming back to what we spoke to at the beginning, bringing these things into your home, I think is a huge piece of this work. And I think for someone, let's say like me, who maybe is less comfortable doing that in a public setting, we have a tradition of singing songs at the table at Friday night dinner and Shabbat lunch, and the third meal, Seudah Shlishit or Shal Shudas, as I would call it. I think for me, like one of the most powerful things is I have a song that I grew up hearing in synagogue that I sing with my kids that I think my grandfather's community sang. I never confirmed with him, but the research points to that. And I sing it at our table, and it feels like there's something happening there. And I know, like, my daughter's in sleepaway camp for the first time this summer, and I'm so curious to hear from her what it was like to hear that in that setting. Wow. And be like, oh, we sing this at home, and what that brought up. So I think, and similarly, I mentioned at the beginning, Move, your album. There was a time, I think during COVID also, where we went to the basement and had like a dark room, and we lit some electronic candles, and we just blasted Move. My girls were younger then. I don't know if they go for it today still, but they it wasn't a 5 Rhythms class, but there was a moment of like just trying to encourage them to like move to your album.
Kids are much more are closer to the divine in that way, right? If we think about like the moment that we separate from the umbilical cord, we get further and further away from that separation, and then our practice is dveikut, right? It's trying to get us back to reattach to that source.
Attachment.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so like, but kids are closer to that attachment, right? So they're able to sing and dance and play, and like that's like the essence of being human is to be that. But we somehow lose it a little bit over time, or a lot bit over time, and then the goal is how do we get more of that back into our lives in a way. And so children could be our best teachers for that, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to now talk a few minutes about this concert that you're putting together for JBS. We are so thrilled and looking forward to it. Let There Be Love. Tell me, why Let There Be Love? Why Tu B'Av? Why the focus on love? Share a little bit.
Yeah, so if anybody's been following my musical career and journey over the last several years, I've been focusing around the concept of love a lot, because to me, like, my definition of the word love is very similar to my definition of the divine, of connecting to that wholeness and that oneness. Like, to me, similar to what we were saying, is like that love is the process of recognizing the separateness and then trying to reattach and trying to reconnect. And so that happens between two individuals, it happens in a community, it happens between parents and children, and that's also like the divine connection, right? How are we reattaching, right? So when I think of my spiritual practice, I think about like love in all of its manifestations: romantic love, divine love, familial love, and all of it. And that becomes the gateway and the portal. So any relationship that I'm in is a spiritual practice in and of itself, right? Every time I'm in dynamic partnership with someone, that is a place for me to practice my spirituality. And for sure, it comes up against a lot of my, the things that I need to work on within myself. And Musar, you were talking about that. That's in relationship, that's when a lot of that stuff comes up. But that's ultimately, for both partners, that's a pathway to the divine, right? That's we're both helping each other get closer to that source. And so many of my songs revolve around that theme. And to me, when defined as that, it's also the path of peace. It's also the path of repair in the world. It's also the path of wholeness. It's all the same. Like, love is one. And I recently was reading that the word for one, echad, is the same numerical value as the word for love, ahava, in Hebrew. And so there's a connection between oneness and love, which we see in our Shema ve'ahavta prayer, right? Every single day we say Shema Yisrael, and the last word is echad, right? Is like we are praising this concept of oneness. Like, just pay attention, Israel. Like, we are one, right? And then the very next word is God is one, but we, all of it, is one, right? And what does that mean? If God is one, then we are one, because we are God and we are with God. All of it is one, right? And then the very next word we say is, and you shall love. Like, right after we say the word echad, we go right into this concept of ahava, of love, right? So they're like, it's built in. It's built into our tradition right there. And so to me, I just keep leaning in on that, because that feels very rich for me spiritually. Yeah.
Do you see them, I don't want to get too in the clouds here, but I'll get a little in the clouds. Do you see oneness and love as like interchangeable or in conversation with each other?
I don't know. I have to talk to a much more wise theologian than I am. But to me, it feels the same. It feels similar, or at least love is the process towards oneness, right? It's like love is the vehicle that we use to remind ourselves of oneness, right? So they're separate in that way and conceptually, but they're linked like so closely. Like, love is the creative juice that we use to experience oneness, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of how I link them.
I love that. I'll riff back on that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So what you're raising for me, the way I've thought about this, but it's very related, is that the line, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, is kind of like our fact, or the way we want the world to be. Remember I said, like, Musar before, you have like, I want to be this, so I do behaviors to do that. And then you transition to the Ve'ahavta paragraph, and it lists a list of ways to accomplish that, right? So like, how do you do that? You write it on your doorpost. Say it when you're sitting and when you're standing. Say it when you lie down and when you get up. Say it when you walk along the way. Like, all those kinds of things. So it speaks to your idea, which is, okay, we need to do the act in order to accomplish the greater understanding.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting.
And that's essentially, even though now it's almost 20 years after I wrote the words of Am I Awake, essentially that's what I was kind of trying to say. It's like, am I awake? Am I prepared? And the Johnny Carson thing as well. You prepare so that you can then have an experience of awakeness, right? Of aliveness, right? So it's like, it's all right there. Our tradition shows us some guideposts, but then we have to then infuse that with our modern understanding of ourselves. And
wow, beautiful. All right, so you have this view of love, and now this brings us full circle. You know what you're going for. You want to fill people with love. You want to spread love in the way that you described it. You're the artist. How do you go from that vision to preparing for this concert event for JBS.
Yeah.
What is that process for you, and how do you get there?
Yeah, I've been writing every single day, just like every day, like a new insight will come in. It's so beautiful because preparing for this concert is also an act of love, right? And so that's just been a spiritual process in and of itself. And then it's preparing some new material, and also obviously I have to prepare some old material of mine that I've been singing for the last 15 years, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who want to hear the more famous of my melodies.
Yeah.
But it's all of it, and it's the preparation is the process of kind of culling together this experience that hopefully leaves people a little bit more open-hearted, a little bit more cracked open. Sometimes it might bring up tears, which is okay. We are inviting all of it, because we're trying to crack it open a little bit more so that everybody goes into the world with a little bit more openness. Because there's one song that I'm going to add into the concert experience. It's a setting of Sim Shalom, and in the middle of our Sim Shalom prayer, we have this line, Kulanu ke'echad be'or panecha. Right? It's such a beautiful line that often gets kind of like we speed through it, right? And I don't know that many other musical settings that actually highlight that line. But that line is so beautiful to me, right? When we're talking about making peace, the way
Sim Shalom being
Sim Shalom is like make peace.
Yeah.
Like we're demanding it.
Yeah.
Like do it, make it happen, right? And then it's this moment that happens after our midah, our standing prayer. We ask for peace, and in the middle of that paragraph it says Kulanu ke'echad be'or panecha. We are all as one, echad, right? In the light of your presence. When we can recognize that your presence is everywhere and in everyone, and like then we can then be as one again. We can reattach.
Wow, beautiful. Oh my God, I'm excited. I can't wait. Here we go. All right. We're very excited. Let There Be Love is going to be Sunday, August 18th, which coincides with Tu B'Av, the Jewish holiday of love. It'll air 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and it'll be on again on the West Coast at 11. You can find out more about Noah by going to his website, noaharonson.com. Check out his YouTube page, check out his Instagram. Noah, we are super, super excited to be hosting this concert event on August 18th. I know I can't wait, and I look forward to connecting around love in the deepest possible way with you then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
All right.